All right. Hello. Welcome, everyone. This is the first episode of What's My 100%. And I am Dené Logan. It's funny, I was sitting here for a few moments before I started recording, just getting still. I closed my eyes and I wanted to get really clear around intention. And what came up and is often the case in terms of what comes up for me when I'm sitting with something that feels like a new challenge that makes me uncomfortable and is stepping out of my comfort zone, is the question, how do I serve? And it's something I talk about a lot when I am facilitating groups or just sitting in contemplative spaces by myself and thinking about challenging myself to do things that make me uncomfortable. And it's something that I took from a talk with one of my favorite teachers, Wayne Dyer, who has been someone who's impacted my life in such profound ways. I think his teachings are always a touchstone that I go back to and find a lot of solace in, a lot of remembrance of larger truths about life that, I think we will all inevitably forget as we're going through our lives inevitable challenges. But when I hear his voice and his teachings, somehow I remember not only these larger universal truths, but I feel like I remember myself and I remember aspects of what I know is what I came into this life and this body to do, that I will sometimes need to remember. And I believe strongly that that is true of all of us. But that we need these reminders, right? And so before I pressed record, I was sitting here and I was thinking about that phrase, how do I serve? And it's something that I talk about hearing Wayne Dyer say in a talk. I think it was with Oprah, although I've never actually found it again because I think it was a podcast recording that I heard him say that in. And he said, the mantra of the lower self is, I need more. The mantra of the higher self is, how do I serve? And I remember at the time, I mean, it was so long ago, and just hearing him say those words and somehow intuitively knowing that that phrase was going to be so important in my life and that it was going to be some sort of a power source when I felt disconnected or afraid, that if I could just remember those words, that it was going to bring me back to a space of clarity. And so thought those words just now before I pressed record. And now I feel a sense of yes and excitement to share with all of you, whoever is listening, my why behind why I decided that I wanted to start a podcast of my own. So, just for starters, I can't remember if I've already said this or not, but I'm Dené Logan, and I am, it's interesting. I feel like I'm in what we would call in depth psychology, a little bit of a liminal space of transition where I'm not exactly what I was. I am becoming something different. I am in an evolutionary phase, as we will all go through multiple times in our lives. But, I'm shifting into feeling a call to do different work than I've been doing. For many years now, I've been a marriage and family therapist. I am also a group facilitator. I facilitate retreats and workshops throughout the year. And now I am an author, which, still it's been almost 6 months since my book Sovereign Love's been out, but referring to myself as an author still feels like, oh, yeah, I wrote a book. And as much as my book baby, as I love to call it, has just become something that is so close to my heart and I cherish so much because that book feels very much in alignment with where I feel like we are collectively and what I feel a real pull to talk about in the conversations in this podcast. But thinking of myself as an author has felt like a little bit of a growing edge or an evolutionary way to think about the work that I do. But also, the work that I've done for many years as a marriage and family therapist, I feel like is transitioning as well. And I think some of that is that I've just seen, well, first of all, the power, the potent force of community and what happens when we sit together in circles and take the time to bear witness to one another's stories and experiences. And, that's in all different forms. That's been such a fundamental aspect of my healing journey. I think I tend to be an introverted soul. And so I spend a lot of time by myself. I can feel a lot more comfortable a lot of times in the space of isolation. It's almost, I think, the space that I thrive in. And yet, when it comes to the components of healing that have been most transformational in my life, and also where I come alive in the space of being with other people and in the space of connection. It's often in spaces of community where we are just in really authentic conversation and allowing ourselves to be witnessed in our most tender spaces and in the spaces that maybe we're conditioned in life in general to not show these aspects of ourselves. But when we come into community in very specific ways and with the intention of fellowship and healing and allowing ourselves to be seen, I feel like there's an alchemy in that I have found over and over again is when I feel most alive, when I feel most connected to authentic power and God, really, and the knowing that we are all connected to one another and that we came here with the purpose of remembering that to a certain extent. And so I've just felt that one, I want to do more of that because that's when I feel most alive. And that I think the thing of talk therapy and the way that I've been doing it the last several years and the way that it's been done, traditionally is really shifting. We're living through a moment in history where the way that we do life collectively is really, I would say, up for a reckoning of sorts, right? Like we are being asked to get really clear as a human race. Like, who do we want to be? What do we want our imprint to be? What do we want to be in terms of the way that when people look back at this time in history where we are being challenged to evolve, to treat one another in more humane ways, to be good stewards of the earth that we are inhabiting, to think about the mark that we want to leave when we leave these bodies. That all of those things are questions that we're really being challenged with right now as we shift into the information age, which is really, we're in a time when artificial intelligence is ramping up and becoming something that as human animals, we're going to be in relationship with in a way that I think is going to really challenge us to come into right relationship with what is sacred about our human experience and the experience of interacting with one another as humans. Now, I don't necessarily think that AI is a bad thing. And I think that it is going to challenge us to rise in the ways that I believe we are incredibly capable of doing. But I think it is going to ask of us to bring a different level of consciousness into all aspects of our lives and the work that we are doing in the ways that we relate to one another and the ways that we show up just with a lot of intentionality. And so because I feel that, I'm really attempting to bring consciousness into the why underneath whatever the work is that I'm doing. And at the end of last year, sometimes I get these little hits of this is something that I know that is going to be important. And I got one of these. Oof, what year is it? 2025. So I got one of these, I guess, almost 4 years ago. Yeah. Around this thing of masculine and feminine energetics that has sort of become a love affair in my life, understanding these dualities and how we are being challenged to integrate these dualities within and these dualities that exist within our environment and the ways that we relate to ourselves and the world around us. And, we will certainly, I'm sure, talk about masculine and feminine energetics ad nauseum because I never get tired of talking about it. But also, The reason I brought that up is that I felt like that was something, I don't feel, I know for sure that was something that came to me from something larger than my ego mind or this body that I'm inhabiting. It was like some part of source energy just started giving me what I can only sort of describe as like a download of like, this is what you need to understand about this. I've worked primarily as a couples therapist for many years now. And I would see these energetics starting to play out in the relationship dynamics between two people. And I didn't really understand why I was making sense of what I was seeing in the way that I was making sense of it, except that's how I know that I was getting some sort of an intuitive hit from something outside of anything I'd been taught. And when I say that, I come from a background in depth psychology, which is often referred to as the psychology of the soul. But, in Jungian psychology, there's a lot of conversations around the anima and the animus, which are the way that Carl Jung described the anima as the female or feminine representations within a man, and the animus as the masculine energetics or forms of representation within a woman. Now, I think that these energetics, from my perspective, are a lot more of a complex exploration, and they're a lot more nuanced than just like our opposite genders representation. But what I am starting to understand about what we can see when we take a moment to think about these energetics is that it's a way that we're really being called into what I believe is the next level of consciousness as human animals. And this thing of coming into the space of personal responsibility. And I was talking about Wayne Dyer a few minutes ago, and I think one of the most profound teachings or elements of Wayne Dyer's teachings that I always come back to is he used to talk a lot about self-reliance, and that so much of his personal journey had taught him how to be self-reliant and the importance of that. Now, there's a way that I think in our society, when I say self-reliance, what that is understood to mean, or maybe the distorted form of that, is hyper independence. And I think it's a really important distinction that we have to make when we talk about the differentiation between self reliance and hyper independence. Because we are interdependent beings. I think if, as much as sometimes the introvert in me thinks this sounds amazing, but if I were to live on an island by myself with no connection to other humans, that would not only be challenging after a while, it would be really difficult for my psyche to process because there's so much about who I am and the way I experience the world that comes from the mirroring that comes to the surface in my interactions with other humans. And as I was talking about in terms of like our fellowship and our community, so often because our initial points of pain or traumatic events or things that we've felt harmed by happen in interactions with humans, it becomes really important for us to be able to heal some of that in our interactions with humans as well. And the difference between self-reliance and this thing of hyper-independence to me is it's really sort of identifying with what I like to think of and refer to a lot of times as a capital S self, that I am not just this body. I am not just this human incarnation. I am something larger. And I think for centuries now, as a human race, we've really been conditioned in all of these different ways to think that we are just these bodies, that we are having a human experience. And every once in a while, we will, have spiritual experiences when we go to church or, we feel really moved by something. But I believe that it is the opposite, that we are souls. We are spiritual beings that are in a human experience for a temporary period of time. And that what is shifting collectively is that we are in that level of consciousness, that remembrance a lot more often. In my experience, none of us live there. We came into this human experience to be human and to have all of the inevitable, struggles that will be a part of our human experience. And the thing of self-reliance is knowing that if I am source energy in a human form, and I believe that we are, that's really understanding that all of the things that I go through, I would say maybe grow through, are experiences that I am being formed by, that there's an alchemy in the challenges, and that there is something larger that is the I am that I am, that is sort of working through all of the things that I'm experiencing. And so it's like the felt sense of that, knowing that I'm never alone as long as I have my capital S self, that I don't, and this is the important distinction, I think, a lot of times when we're talking about hyper independence versus, a lot of my work has been surrounding how we start to heal codependency and move away from our more codependent tendencies. And if I don't believe that there is a fundamental sense of self that I can rely on, and that I am whole in and of myself, always evolving, always expanding, but that I am a whole being, I will believe that I need something outside of myself to be complete. And when I believe that I need anything outside of myself to be complete, that creates a dependence on that thing, which then, from my perspective, starts to create a distortion in terms of the truth of who we are. There's a reliance that we will start to shift and manipulate and behave in ways that are not in alignment with the higher truth of who we are, in an attempt to keep that thing in the way that we believe that we need it in our lives and in our relationships, so that we can be okay. So it's like a survival strategy, but it's sort of a maladaptive one, because we're not actually believing that we can thrive, believing that we are whole. We're believing that we need something outside of ourselves to be whole. And I believe that our soul will never participate in something that is not rooted in truth. And so there are all of these ways that we'll start to feel a lot of angst and challenge around that distortion. And I think that so much of what I've come to understand about, just the challenges that so many of us face in terms of, what we would call our mental health struggles, and, Western culture especially, I think are really about us being removed from that truth of our capital S self and who we are. So I think that's a lot of what I want to talk about. I think that's a lot of what I believe we are coming into the space of remembrance around collectively. And, it's funny because as I sit and think about my why, it's amazing how long it took me to do this. Although I feel like I've had like a pull and a desire to have a podcast of my own for a while. And, I had a podcast called Cheaper Than Therapy. You can still listen to it, with my dear, dear sister, Vanessa Bennett. And, we were two therapists that were out of grad school and just sort of feeling like we really wanted to share the conversations that we were having with the world and whoever was interested in listening. And it was such a beautiful podcast that gave both of us an opportunity to connect and, share the teachings and things that felt most resonant with us, and have conversations with people that we felt incredibly inspired by. And what I realized for me was there was a lot of safety in doing that with someone else for me. That inner introvert, but also, if I'm honest, the part of me that still grapples sometimes with being seen and being judged, and, my limiting beliefs around not enough that come to the surface, felt a little bit apprehensive around doing a podcast by myself, because it felt like, this is like my version of putting out what feels most resonant and true and alive for me right now. And I've had these moments in my life where I've challenged myself to do that, to step into the space of, Dené, you are enough because you say you are enough to do whatever the thing is that you long to do. And, I think certainly when I decided to go to grad school and felt that call to become a therapist. Certainly when I felt the pull to write the book Sovereign Love, those things were coming up for me. And, there's a quote from the Gospel of Thomas that I love so much that I often come back to. And it's, if you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. And the reason I love that quote so much is I have this way of experiencing a lot of what our struggles are as human animals, as us not living in alignment with truth. And so for me, there were many, many years of my life where I was scared to stand as an independent self. I share in my book, and I've talked a lot about the fact that I was married for almost 12 years to just an incredible human who's still a very dear friend of mine. And, at some point, I realized that there was a lot of societal conditioning that led to my decision to get married. And, when I look back on it, in a pretty unconscious way, and that I was sort of like playing a role for many years of my life. Like, this is the role that you're meant to play. This is what your life is meant to look like. This is adulting, whatever that means. And in those years, there were all of these ways that I was struggling a lot of times, certainly with my mental health, certainly with using a lot of things like a lot of weed to anesthetize my way through. I think what I knew on some level was not aligned with the truth of how I wanted to live and who I wanted to be. And it would show up as a lot of depression and anxiety. And I just, at some point, as I've been working with clients and certainly have experienced within my own path, there's a way that when we are not living in alignment with truth, not only does that not come without consequence, but it manifests in how we feel. And so there are all of these ways now that when I feel the pull to do something or step into something that frightens me, I know that that's not random. I know that that's some part of my higher self challenging me to really believe in my potential, and that in doing that, I know for sure that gives others permission to do the same. But if I don't do it, that does not come without a cost. And it starts to feel like ways that I don't trust myself. It impacts my self-esteem. I really don't feel as useful in the world if I'm not living in alignment with all of the things that I know that I have the potential to do and become. And I think that's true of all of us, right? So in terms of the why of this podcast, it feels like some part of me is really feeling this call to have conversations right now in this moment in history in a very specific way. And that specific way to me is in alignment with personal responsibility. And this thing of what's my 100% has just been a way that I really experience the world, which is like radical personal responsibility. And in that radical personal responsibility, it's twofold for me. So the buck stops with me. Like, I am responsible for my life. I am not a victim of anyone. And I say that quite intentionally, that, I think understanding for me and coming into the belief system that every single person on this planet outside of me gets to be exactly who they are, and that I am a victim of nothing, has been the absolute game changer of my life. And in that, I get to decide how I'm going to relate to people based on who they are, with a lot of compassion for myself and other, reverence for maybe what this interaction with this person in any given moment is showing me, mirroring back to me about myself, but also that I am ultimately responsible for my life. No one is coming to save me. I'm actually not entitled to anything. And it's an important distinction, I think, that a lot of times we have to make, that while I'm not entitled to anything, I am worthy of a life beyond my wildest dreams. But the entitlement piece is a lot of times that my ego mind can think that there's a specific way that I need something to play out, or that I need someone else to be for me in order for me to be okay or to be comfortable. And what I've found over time is that when I challenge myself to really be in right relationship with, is that true? And if I had an expectation, was that a reasonable expectation to have? I often say that expectations are preconceived resentments. That's like something that I learned in 12-step rooms. And I think it's one of those expressions that is so potent because it really brings it back to this space of personal responsibility. And that if the only person I get to be in control of is me in this life, I can either be defeated by that as a truth, or I can feel unbelievably empowered by that as a resonant truth. I have found the latter to be true, that knowing that my life is mine and I get to create whatever I choose to from the space of I am everything I need. I have everything within me that I could ever possibly need. Then all of a sudden, like I was going to say sky's the limit, but it feels like sky is too limited for what I have the potential to do and be and experience and create. But that's not unique to me. That is absolutely true of all of us in my experience. And so I think we are starting to come into that understanding as human animals more and more, and challenging ourselves to bring a deeper level of consciousness and slow down our process a little bit and be in the inquiry when we feel the inevitable activation points and challenges that come up in our life. Being in the inquiry around, like, what is the story I'm telling myself right now about what this is, what this should be, that it isn't, what else could be true, what feels historic about that. And so I think, I have this really strong belief of like two things, actually. One, that this thing of personal responsibility and really coming into a deeper level of consciousness is what is going to be how we create the world that I believe we are being called to create right now. I won't even say save the world, because I don't think that the world as it's been for centuries is something that we want to save. I think it's time for us to birth a new world, birth a world that is rooted in who we have the potential to be as a human race. But what that requires of each of us is coming into a greater level of consciousness. And so, to me, this thing of taking 100% responsibility is not only how I believe that we are going to birth the new world that we are, I believe, ready to create, I know, but also that this is what is going to be our point of remembering our magic and our potential as a human race. I think we've barely scratched the surface of what we're able to do and be and create when we really come into this understanding that we are little cups of source energy. We are like human beings that are emanating source from our very being. And we can talk about more of what that means, right? But, I think this is how we escape the world that we've been living, that I believe is no longer serving us, is no longer sustainable to the earth that we've been inhabiting, and how we create heaven on earth, which I know is possible. I know it is possible for us to live in a more conscious, fulfilled, embodied, alive, just with reverence for all that we are way. And I believe that this is what the dawn of the Aquarian age, which started in 2023. And, I am not an expert in astrology, but I have some friends who are very well versed in astrology. And I want them to come in and talk about not only what this shift into the Aquarian age means for all of us, but also this thing of the planet Pluto shifting into Aquarius from Capricorn, and how that means that we are shifting from societal structures that are very sort of like rigid and externally defined, and that are not always in alignment with expansion and creation and creativity in the imaginal space of who we all are. But that is what the Aquarian age is ushering in for, I believe, us as a human race, that we have entered a period of renaissance. Now, if you look at the physical world as it stands right now, for many of you, you might say, really? Because that's not what I feel like I am seeing as I look around me. But to me, that is also the shift from five sensory consciousness, which is the consciousness of what we can see, hear, taste, touch, and smell, to multisensory consciousness, which is what I believe is going to be a fundamental aspect of the Aquarian age. And that is the aspects like our intuition and tuning into the synchronicities of life and being able to connect with other beings telepathically. And that, again, we have barely scratched the surface of our human potential, but that we're starting to understand that as who and what we have the potential to be. Yeah. So it's exciting. And, I was thinking about this Rumi quote that I love, where Rumi said, "The day you were born, a ladder was set up to help you escape this world." And I love that quote so much, because to me, it really has to do with Dharma and what our soul's calling is, and who I believe on some level, all of us come into this space as we're living, with a pull, a call, a knowing that, like, this is the thing that I long to do, that I know on some level, or maybe am afraid to know even, that I have the potential to do or be, that these things are, a part of what I came into this body to do and become. And I think as we enter this Aquarian age, what will be the calling for all of us is to step into that potential. Because if we think about the pain and the really like the depression of the aspects of our aliveness, like that is to me what we see a lot of times playing out in these distorted structures that are really suppressing. And if you think about what depression is, it's like a suppression of aspects of our authentic self that are a result of our pain points or traumatic events that make us question ourselves, sort of shift away from the larger truths of who we are. But that as we come back into this space of how do I serve based on the truth of who I am and the potential that has always been there, but maybe I've been conditioned to question it for whatever reason. And that as we become a society where everybody is coming to life based on the unique elements of their own potential, that all of a sudden there is life force and there is beauty and there is no longer need to be afraid, because on so many levels, all of the destruction and the war and the polarization and the problems that have sort of been the illusion that we've been operating from are as a result of us not really fully being alive in these bodies and not really engaged and plugged in to our magic, right? But the minute that we are plugged into our magic and we remember that we are everything we need within ourselves, that we are source within ourselves, then I don't need to destroy anyone. I don't need to be in that space of envy or fear or the desire to cause harm for any reason, because I remember the I am that I am, right? So, just in terms of what to expect from what's my 100%, it's these types of conversations that I believe are bringing us back to life and into the fullest embodiment of our potential. And I'm excited to just share what feels alive for me. And that's going to shift and evolve and, be playful and in the space of my aliveness and eros and exploration and all of these things that, as I have over the last several years given myself more permission to be in and unapologetically embody, I would love to be, a space in your life, a source of permission giving for you to do that and explore that for yourself as well. Yeah. So to close for this first, I started to say session. I've been a therapist for a long time, but this first episode, I I pull a deck a lot, or I pull cards from decks a lot of times when I'm facilitating retreats or workshops. And I do that because I believe so strongly in the power of ritual. Ritual has been such a potent aspect of my own healing journey. And that's all different types of ritual. A lot of times that is starting off every single day of my life in meditation. I like to pull a tarot card, and I have a specific deck that I pull from. Maybe I'll bring that deck in for an episode at some point. But, that deck to me has just been, I don't know, I think we start to build relationships with spirit through things like our decks. And I have a lot of decks. I have, I was going to say a little bit of problem, but I think there's so much about these decks that I love, just in terms of the artwork and the poetry and the mysticism and magic that I feel every time I sit still and start to ask questions of my larger self, of my angels, of my guides, of spirit, and, a podcast where we have conversations about my connection to those elements of universal truth is something at this point that I'm really excited about, because I know those are the conversations that I want to have, that I feel like I love tuning into, and just hoping that whoever is in alignment with that and excited about having those conversations as well will find this, and we can sort of be in that vibration together. So I pulled a card right before I sat down to record from the Sufi Wisdom Oracle. If you're listening to this, you won't see it, but if you're watching it on YouTube, you will see that. And what's so funny, and I often say this when I'm facilitating retreats, it is never not the case. Like, yet to have the experience that whatever card flies out, flips over, is not completely aligned with whatever the conversation is that I am about to have. And once again, this is no exception. And so this is the card. I don't know if you guys can see it. It's beautiful, but it says, limitation is power. Lean into your limitations. So it starts off with a Rumi quote. Don't look for water, become thirsty. Necessity develops organs of perception. Oh man, increase your necessity so that you may increase your perception. That's Rumi. Do you have a great idea that you have placed on the back burner just because you thought it required resources outside of your reach? Well, the great mystic Rumi is talking to you. He wants you to realize that flaring fire of inspiration is mostly sparked through limitation. Necessity provides incentive, which is the mother of all inventions. It only takes love and extended faith to make it happen. The oracle is guiding you to embrace your new ideas creatively, to capitalize on them through your innovative capability. View them as opportunities rather than problems, and you will marvel at the brilliance which can evolve from limitation. Limitation is the fertile ground in which the seeds of creativity sprout and grow. Challenges, when approached positively, become helpful in getting creative juices flowing. Remember, dear one, to be ready to adapt. Be flexible. Prepare to bend and make shifts as it becomes necessary. When unexpected things happen, do not see them as obstacles to your creativity. Respond with imagination and a new way of looking at them that becomes part of the creation itself. Improvise within the conditions and create with what you are given. The more you become aware of this process, the more you can affect what happens. And so the mantra for this card is, I am determined to lean into what seems to be a limitation and allow it to create a shift in the way I perceive the experience. I realize my limitations will allow me greater freedom of spirit and soul, which is the precious gift of divine grace. Beautiful. I think I had this thought about a week ago when I was just sitting with, getting started, and I don't have help with starting a podcast. And I feel like, where we landed with our last podcast was that there were, some beautiful cooks in the kitchen helping us make it happen. And, in a lot of ways, it was like a well-oiled machine. And this won't be that, because I decided, at least not in the beginning, but I decided that I really didn't want to make the perfect the enemy of the good enough. And I wanted to just let myself get in here and play and have fun with it and not worry so much about doing it in any sort of specific way, but just like trusting in the evolution that would inevitably happen over time. So this is my 100% me showing up and just allowing myself to trust in whatever I believe are my perceived limitations, and that they are guiding me towards stepping into what is a call right now, I believe, for a very specific reason. And so I guess what I would leave you with or ask of you for this first episode of What's My 100% is just to be in that contemplative space around anything that you are perceiving as a limitation in your life right now. And how can you be in the space of embracing it as your teacher, as your challenge, as your growing edge that you want to be really grateful for, because it's sort of pointing you in the direction of something that is an aspect of your becoming. And that as you do that, there is liberation to be found, as is true for all of us, right? So I'm going to share with you guys. I just recorded 42 minutes of just me talking to me of this first episode. And, I think it's that thing of just getting in there and letting yourself play a little bit. So I'm excited to have fun. I'm excited for the conversations that I feel really, really hungry to have, and inspired by just certain people who are doing the work of bringing this sense of aliveness into the world and taking personal responsibility in a way that I believe we all are learning how to do. So this is my 100%. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. And I am so excited to do some more.